Hey everybody, today we're going to be doing a video showing another example of a breeding fish for profit tank. In the past we did a couple different combinations with guppies and shrimp and plecos. Today we're going to do a tank that's a little bit different, a little bit of a larger tank requirement. That's this tank right here. This tank is a 40-gallon breeder, and what I have in here are the Bozemanii Rainbowfish. These happen to be a strain from Gary Lang. And we also have some super red Bristlenose Plecos in here. You can see that there's a couple around the tank here. It's a really nice one right here. And this is something a little bit different to what we usually do. What you need to have in this tank is just pick a flavor of rainbow fish that you like. I happen to like the Bozemanii. Another popular one that's pretty expensive compared to some other strains are the Wapoga Red Laser. Just because the rainbows have a little bit of a longer grow out time compared to other fish. So you want to pick fish, first of all, that you like and you enjoy looking at, but also with that long grow out time that they're worth, you more than break even in the end with the amount of time that it takes for them to grow out. So starting out with the rainbow fish here, how to breed those. In this tank you just need a spawning mop, and I'll show you what I have in this tank here. We've got the spawning mop that I had in this tank, and there's a bunch of videos on YouTube showing how you make these spawning mops, and I happen to use a piece of insulation to make it float, the styrofoam insulation that I use for shipping. I dropped this in here about 10 days ago after letting the mop stay in there for at least 10 days. And we can see in the back there, I've got a bunch of fry growing out. And pretty much to raise the fry, it's not like guppies or other fish where you kind of start them right on live baby brine. Some things that I use are Ceramicron and Hikari First Bites. I try to put them in a seasoned tank. This is a 10-gallon. And I like to have mulm on the bottom and detritus and algae on the sides of the tank, live plants for the infusoria. You could do infusoria cultures if you want. I don't like to. So I start them on the Ceramicron as soon as I move the mop and keep them on that for a while. You can see these guys here on the bottom. They mostly like to feed from the top, but they will sift through the bottom a little bit. Here's a smaller spawn of the rainbow fish. These guys are about 2 months old. It's a smaller spawn because I had other fish besides the rainbow fish in the tank when I had the mop. It was actually rosy barbs, and I did see them picking through the mop and eating a lot of the eggs, which is why now they're the only ones in the tank. We have a much larger spawn that way. You see these guys are starting to look like rainbow fish, but again, they are a slower grower, and I like to sell them about 1 inch unsexed, and it would take at least 4 months to get that size. So you want to make sure that your spawn is big enough that it's worth your time. I guess I should talk about the filtration in the back. Sponge filter would be just fine. This setup I have a matin filter, which is pretty much like a sponge filter, except it's got more surface area. But I like sponge filters. Air is just fine. And in the main tank here, in the breeding tank, the only filtration I have is 2 sponge filters, 1 in each corner. I believe it's the Hydro 4 or Hydro 5 sponge filter. And they're not set too high. These guys don't need high current. They do very well in here. Water changes, I would say in this tank, every other day maybe is 25%. That's because it's on the automatic water change system. If I had this tank without it, maybe I'd do 25% once a week. But because it's automated, I can give them, a few more extra water changes. No extra work for me. Before I move on to the Bristlenose Pleco breeding, I do want to mention that we can make some profit with the plants in this tank. I have a little bit of a nubius on the driftwood, but the main plant in here is obviously the jungle val. And you can see how it kind of produces the runners here, where one of the main plants will shoot off a runner and then it'll shoot up. and grow and then shoot other runners, so they're all connected. And I just recently took out 30 or 40 runners that were all in the front here so that I could get a better view of the rainbows. And you could sell those online, or you could bring them to a local club. Both do really well. And I used to have a floating plant in here. I used to have frogbit in this tank, but I chose to remove it just because I wanted a better view of the rainbows. Just wanted more light to come down so that I could see them better. And I'm fortunate enough to have multiple tanks, so I just moved the frogbit here to other tanks. This is another one that's really popular online, especially in the summer. You can see you get the nice pads here, and the roots, the way they come down, I think it looks really cool in a tank, even though it does block out some light. But I have setups where I put like a ring up front here so that it blocks the floating plants. Here's a setup where I put the floating ring to prevent the frogbit from taking over the entire top of the tank. The fish spend most of the time up front anyway because they're excited to get fed. The light's able to come down, I get a good view of them. Also gives a lot of space for floating food to hang out so they know where the food's coming. It also prevents the food from actually staying on the frogbit, and that can actually kill the frogbit and actually attract insects. So we definitely don't want that, so this is a great solution for that. For the Plecos, it's pretty simple to breed them in this setup. All you need is one or two of the Pleco caves I have here. I got these on Amazon, and they come in different designs, so they're not an eyesore in the tank. I have 5 adults in here, and that's probably the amount I would go with. You could do more if you're always pulling them out of the cave when the fry are born. That's what I do, just because when I go to sell them, it's impossible to catch fish out of here. Also lets me target feed the new fry. You'll have to pardon the flashlight glare here, but taking a look inside the cave here, we can see that the main breeding male is actually sitting on a bunch of wigglers. There he goes, protecting them. And they still have their yolk sacs. I'll probably give these guys another day or so, and then I'll actually move the fry into another tank, just because I don't want them going loose in here and having to compete with the rainbows and the adults for food. Here's a typical 10-gallon setup that I have for the Pleco fry. The floating plant in here, which is technically a stem plant, but I'm using it as a floating plant, it's growing in that way, is, I believe it's Hygrophila polysperma green. And I've used frog bit before. Plecos start munching on the frog bit, in my experience. And I'll also use pothos. I'll put pothos plant, you can get it at Home Depot, out in the back to kind of help clean the water a bit, because we are putting a lot of fish into a small tank. These guys are the just normal bristlenose longfin, large spawn. I put some Rapaceans so they'd come out. These guys are about a week old, and I'll feed them community blend, bottom scratcher, morning wood, spawn and grow. They'll eat it all. I try to include a hiding place for them, so I put the coconut hut in, and they like hiding under there until their yolk sacs are fully absorbed and they have to go out and eat. This tank happens to have cholla wood in there, so they can munch on that as well. They don't always need that. That's a new thing I'm trying. You can see it's a very similar setup here, except the floating plant is Pocostem installatus octopus, which again is a stem plant that I just dropped in there and started growing floating. These are some longfin, super red bristlenose. We have some snails on cleanup duty here that came in with the plant. Some pond snails and some blue ram's horn snails. Depending on the size of the spawn and how many I have, I'll leave them in the 10-gallon. These guys are getting 20 to 30% every other day water change. And if I get a lot of mulm buildup, something like in this tank, eventually I'll, get all that out of there in a manual water change. Doesn't harm the fish at all. You can see in this tank we have some lemon blue-eyed bristlenose, and they're feeding through the mulm. I find it beneficial, but I do vacuum it out once in a while just when it builds up too much. This spawn I'll probably move to a 20 gallon eventually. Ideally, you would have a lot of these Plecos in a 20 gallon instead of a 10. Just because I'm on the auto water change and we have the matte filter, I can kind of get away with doing it in a 10 gallon. As they get to that sellable size, inch and a half, a spawn this size would definitely need the 20 gallon. Here are all the foods I feed for this particular tank setup for breeding fish for profit. We've got the different types of Rapache, the bomb scratcher, spawn and grow, and community blend. We have the Ceramicron food, which is for the newborn rainbow fish fry. For the adult rainbow fish, I'll feed flake food. It could be any. I happen to do extreme. I also do the pellets there and the bug bites I like a lot. And as the fry get bigger of the rainbow fish, I'll throw in some Hikari first bites. And obviously also I'm doing live baby brine for them as they get bigger. Maybe a week old, I'll start putting it in. Some of the ones that are hatching first are large enough to take the live baby brine. So that was another example of a breeding fish for profit tank. Something a little bit different that wasn't a guppies and shrimp combo like I've done in the past. If you're looking to do something a little different, you can utilize, a larger tank that you have. Although the previous ones that I've shown would work in 40 gallon as well. The only downside to this method is that you do need multiple tanks. So it's not just the 40 gallon like it would be with the other setups that are using one tank. This would require multiple. You could do some hang-on breeder box stuff with that. You could probably raise some fry in a breeder box like this. Or you can raise the bristlenose babies in the tank with the rainbows. They might pick a few off as their firstborn with these larger rainbows, but I'm sure a good number of them would survive. So those are options there. You see this setup of breeding fish for profit that we had in the past is doing really, really well. Tons of Japan blue gold double sword guppies. Doesn't look like it, but there's a lot of shrimp in here. The more you look, the more shrimp you see. I hope that helped you guys out. Subscribe if you haven't, and we'll see you in the next one.